I know. It's been 6 months and I am sorry, but hopefully this video can make it up. This decade so far has been a good decade for Spider-Man fans across all media except for the source material. At the very beginning of the decade, we started off hot with Spider-Man Miles Morales. Then the very next year, we got Spider-Man No Way Home, which to many people is their favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. And then in 2023, we get Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and to me, that is the greatest Spider-Man movie ever. And then 4 months later, we got Spider-Man 2 by Insomniac. Even though that game is very controversial amongst fans on whether or not it's good or not, I personally think it's still good. Then 2 years after that, we got season 1 of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And then this year in 2026, we're getting Spider-Man Brand New Day and season 2 of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man in the same year. And then next year, we're going to get Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. And hopefully around that time period, either this year or next year, we find out when Insomniac Spider-Man 3 is coming out. Hopefully 2028. Mind you, all of this is amazing, but nothing tops being a Spider-Man fan in the 2000s. And I don't think, especially from 2000 to around 2006, across all forms of media, I don't think a comic book character has had a higher peak than Spider-Man did in the 2000s. During that time period, it was like Marvel, Sony, and Activision were all just firing on all cylinders for all of their projects. And to say the least, the 90s were a pretty turbulent and controversial decade for the wall crawler, especially from the years of 1994 all the way to the very end of the 1990s. The James Cameron Spider-Man movie got canceled, along with Marvel having to sell Spider-Man's film rights to Sony around this point in time due to bankruptcy. But we did have the 90s cartoon, in which I think is the greatest piece of Spider-Man media of all time. It's not part of the source material. But then again, we had the second Clone Saga, and then we had the weird John Byrne reboot at the end of the decade that did not work out at all. But anyways, let's start at the very beginning of not only the decade but the millennium. In the year 2000, Marvel released Ultimate Spider-Man, written by Brian Michael Bendis and drawn by Mark Bagley. And this was a whole new retelling of the character inside of a separate universe, which also helped launch the 2000s Ultimate Universe. Even though the Ultimate Universe is very controversial for many good reasons, Ultimate Spider-Man, the entire run, is the only constant from that entire universe. The series was so well beloved that a lot of people to this day still recommend reading Ultimate Spider-Man as a beginner's guide for someone who's trying to get into the wall crawler. And the very next year in 2001, we got J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. hopping on the Spider-Man series for Earth 616. And this was another comic book run that was highly acclaimed. And then the very next year, we get Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1, in which that movie helped revitalize the comic book movie genre as a whole, along with the Blade and X-Men franchise as well. And then we got MTV's Spider-Man the New Animated Series, which also has a large cult fan base. And I think some fans are trying to remake the show with the same animation style on the internet as well. But then going back to the source material, the JMS run had the Coming Home arc, Aunt May figuring out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, Mary Jane and Peter Parker getting back together, Peter Parker becoming a high school teacher. We also had Spidey's involvement in Civil War that also directly led into Back in Black. And then in the Ultimate Universe, we had the revamped Venom/Symbiote saga, in which that changed both Peter and Eddie Brock's entire dynamic by making them childhood friends that initially separated but came back together, but also the symbiote being the reason why they both separated once again. And another thing I loved about this run was that they stretched out Peter Parker's entire origin story for the Ultimate Universe. Instead of it being your typical one-issue origin, this spanned across 6 or 7 issues. And then you have the Norman Osborn saga, where Norman basically comes back to life to torment Peter in his psyche. And then in 2004, we got the magnum opus that is Spider-Man 2. This movie is a cultural phenomenon. You don't even have to be a fan of the superhero movie genre or even superheroes in general, but Spider-Man 2 is a movie that everybody on the planet has to see. And we also can't talk about the Raimi franchise without talking about the tie-in games as well, in which the first 2 games were great. And staying on the topic of video games, we had both Ultimate Spider-Man and Spider-Man Web of Shadows this decade, in which both games are phenomenal, with Ultimate Spider-Man being the direct follow-up for the Venom arc in the original Ultimate Universe. And then Web of Shadows, bro. And I love the fact that this game had 4 distinct endings depending on which moral route that you took. And mind you, this was a game that came out in 2008, I think, and your decisions throughout the main story dictated where the story went. But this decade did have a few bumps in the road, with Sins Past being one of them. And it really did make me sick that it took over a decade for this monstrosity of a story to be retconned. So basically what happened was Peter Parker finds these twins that he later finds out were his own children through Gwen Stacy. And you know, Gwen Stacy is dead. And Gwen Stacy's been dead since the 70s. That part's not even terrible. That part wasn't even the bad part. I think initially looking at it at first glance, that seems like a pretty compelling topic. But then all of it goes out the window when we find out the plot twist that Gwen Stacy actually got impregnated by Norman Osborn. When you ask any Spider-Man fan or any comic book fan that has read One More Day, 95% of the time it's going to be in a negative connotation. And then you have One More Day. What essentially happened was Aunt May is hospitalized due to a failed assassination attempt that was targeted towards Peter Parker. And she's in the hospital dying, and Peter Parker and MJ, they make a deal with the devil and sacrifice their entire marriage to save Aunt May's life. And this move was essentially made for Peter Parker to feel younger and feel more relatable to the audience. And ever since then, Peter Parker as a character has not been written the same ever since. And to this day, we're still feeling the negative effects of One More Day. And mind you, this storyline came out around 2006 and 2007. We are in 2026 right now. And that story still hasn't been retconned after fans for years have been begging for this to be retconned. And like, it's so simple that Marvel can literally just create a story arc that revolves around reversing the effects of One More Day. But to this day, they still haven't done that. But enough with the ranting, back to the main topic at hand with this decade. But regardless, we end off the decade with a bang, and that is the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon, in which that is one of the best pieces of Spider-Man media of all time across all forms of media: comics, video games, TV shows, anything that you can think of. It is one of the best. And I rewatched it a few months back, and it is still that good. Like, everything about this story is utter perfection. Peter's relationships with his rogues gallery, his friends, his family, everything about this story is done so well. And the best part of it was the long-lasting Goblin saga that basically lasted the entirety of the show until it was unfortunately canceled. Spoilers for the show if you haven't seen it. It starts off with the Goblin doing what the Goblin does, which is wreaking havoc throughout the entirety of New York City. And then all signs basically point to it obviously being Norman Osborn. But what makes this compelling is that in separate scenes we also see Harry Osborn taking the Globulin Green formula. And then for most situations where the Green Goblin would attack where he's in the same location as Harry Osborn would essentially disappear. Once again, basically with all signs pointing to it now being Harry. In which later on it was revealed that Harry was the Green Goblin and then he went away to do rehab. And at the end of season 2, we basically got baited and it was actually Norman Osborn who was the Goblin the entire time. And then afterwards he had a big fight with Spider-Man, and that it seemed that Norman Osborn died in an explosion, but he actually survived towards the end of season 2. Well, actually no, at the end of the season 2 finale. And then unfortunately the show got canceled so they can produce the monstrosity that is Ultimate Spider-Man. I know there's some sort of contract dispute that's needed in order to do this, but please do something. I need this show to be revived like you guys did with X-Men 97. X-Men 97 is, in my opinion, the greatest MCU project of all time. And I really do think reviving the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon can have that same level of effect, along with bringing back the 90s Spider-Man cartoon as well. But that's it for the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I promise I will not take 6 months to make another video, but see you guys later.